play that larger role, even though he's really important, obviously, from the straight Old Testament view. All of the line of Israel and David and Solomon, that these people all come from Seth. You don't really get much about him in Genesis. They pretty much go straight into the children that he has. And this is very interesting because in the apocryphal texts that are included in the Catholic Bible, it's some of them, and also some of the Gnostic texts as well. They have an appendium, kind of, to the Pentateuch. They have a prologue, which goes through the eons of development before the start of the Old Testament.
Okay.
And this goes into what John Lash has been talking about, with the aeons, the deities which are involved with different levels of creation.
Ah, yes, that's true.
Which eventually come to Sophia.
Yes.
And the creation, of the new race on Earth, and Gaia. And so, whereas in the mainstream Old Testament or Christian view, Seth doesn't play much importance. In the Gnostic view, Seth is the most important person.
It sounds to me already that
you've got kind of the two sides of arguably one doctrine.
Well, exactly. The
talks about one figure, exclusively. They place paramount importance on him, and the other group also accepts that he's important but doesn't talk about him.
Do you think we have that split here of the esoteric and the exoteric? Like right there, they're splitting up. We have the hermetic on one side and the prosaic on the other, basically.
Yeah, I think that could definitely be the case. I mean, Josephus, when he's writing this, is around, just post Jesus, and he's around with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and these Jews who would have been kind of like a proto-Talmudic form of Judaism. And these guys disliked the Gnostics and all these other sects as well,
Yes.
So I'd say that, it's definitely what we have. We have kind of the institutionalized Christian chronology and history going through the Old Testament, and then we have this other side, which was only really taught in more out-of-the-way areas that weren't affected by the main governance, the church. So we have the two sides of the story. Yeah, following on with looking at Genesis in connection with Cain, Abel, and Seth, the three first sons of Adam, And in a way, we could see that these three children are kind of a device, because in pretty much every world faith, even the more modern forms, you have the three pillars of Islam.
Yes.
Which are kind of three fundamental laws, and they're always shown next to pillars also. We have the three lights of Freemasonry, which is known as the square, the compass, and the Bible. We have the Holy Trinity of the Catholic Church. So we often have the Trinity, the three, used as a device, and you can see that it's being used here in Genesis,
Absolutely, yeah.
So the three pillars, the three columns again.
Would you say, could one even interpret this like in the context of, well, I don't know, Cain is like to represent the broken pillar, or the one that, didn't make it in that sense, and then we have Seth, like the last one is the crowning one, I guess we can say, or represented by the Corinthian. Would that be too far?
I guess you could say that. I perhaps would think that was going too far, but definitely the metaphor is there, and you could use it that Cain, being the first son, would have kind of been one of the, would be like the Doric, the simple column.
Yeah.
Abel as the second column would be Ionic, and then Seth would be the Corinthian, the flowering.
Yes.
And so you could definitely see it that way.
Interesting.
It's more perhaps just as I said, of it being used as a device of the Trinity, of this primordial three, which no matter which faith you look into, the primordial three always birth what they call the 10,000 things.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely.
So perhaps, you could overlay the columns over that concept. I'm not so sure about that, but again, I'm open to it,
Yeah.
But in terms of the continuation then. So Abel's out of the picture. He's been killed. Cain has left the land of Eden and gone to the land of Nod, as it's referred to in the Bible. And it actually says the land of Nod, east of Eden. So it gives you a geographical location of it as well. Yeah? And starts the first city. Then back in the holy side of the valley, you know, you've got these two sides have kind of emerged. Seth also knows his wife. Apparently, you know, there's more children there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Straight away.
Yep.
So Seth knows his wife and has a son, who sometimes is, or it depends on which translation you look at, and I find this interesting, that sometimes he's named Enos, sometimes Enosh,
yes,
or sometimes Enoch. Now this is really, really interesting because they've opened up kind of a duality, because Cain's first son is named Enoch. So on one side of the valley, Seth's son is Enoch, and then on the other side of the valley, you've got Cain and his son Enoch. So again, if we were to take this back to kind of two sides developing, we have the two Enochs, who kind of seem to mirror each other.
Yeah.
And in a modern context, we could pick up the ball, and I think this is really fascinating, that we have, through the early church, only allowed theurgy. Theurgy, in its truest sense, was meant to have come from the writings of Enoch.
Okay.
But then also, in the modern magical realms, we have John Dee creating Enochian magic.
Indeed, yeah.
So we have two Enochian forms of magic on opposing sides. So it's fascinating. It has these straight run-ons from this duality noted in this person in early biblical traditions, coming all the way up to the actual forms of magic which were and weren't allowed, you know. They both come from Enoch. But there's some ambiguation about which Enoch it is. You know, perhaps they're both talking about the same one.
Could be.
They're talking about different ones. We can't even tell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Enosh
that's
is
a fascinating concept, the two Enochs. And again, we could say that this was kind of a parallel to the pillars of the sons of Seth again.
Ah, yeah.
These two pillars. But again, this is kind of a metaphysical understanding of it. You know, it's kind of slotting pieces into each other. So perhaps we should kind of take that out of it, because it could kind of confuse the matter a little bit.
But it's interesting to note, nonetheless, that things are, the water is this muddy from the get-go, so to speak. Nothing is really clear, and it's very open for interpretation, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So overall, with Josephus writing about the pillars of the sons of Seth, and the various Gnostic sects which came out of this kind of body of knowledge, we have some very, very different views on the Bible, as I mentioned, to the modern interpretation of the Old Testament, you know?
Yes.
And we're going back to this concept of the archons through the Gnostics. And the Gnostic, or what has been called the Christian Gnostic doctrine, comes through a group that are known as the Sethians.
Sethian?
Yeah, quite literally.
Ah.
So they're the followers of Seth. And the Sethian doctrine was espoused by Philo and many others in the early Alexandrian church also. And these became the kind of the foundations of what has been called Christian Gnosticism, but what I'd say is more rightly called Judaic Gnosticism. Because how can you say something is Christian if it's pre-Christian?
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
kind of, you're connecting something in the past with something that hasn't arrived yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it would be like calling the Britons the proto-Romans or something. You know?
Right.
It's very funny that they allowed that reference to be used so much. But
good point.
The view of these Gnostics which came through the Sethians were rife at this point in the early church. And we see this in many sects which people can Google up on, you know, the Thomasines, the Basildeans, the Venetetians or the Venetinians, and very many other sects that were very, very important in the early conception of Christianity. And funnily enough, we're also connected with the earliest forms of British Christianity. The British Celtic Church was very connected with the Alexandrian Church of Egypt and Greece, you know.
Okay, interesting.
So these same ideas not only run through the Gnostic sects, they also cross over into the Eastern Orthodox Catholicism, which I guess people call Catholicism again, but it's very, very different. It's a lot more based on Greek interpretations of things and connecting it again with Hermeticism quite clearly, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we have in the Eastern Orthodox, again, a remnant of some of these mystical Christian practices which came from an earlier form of Gnosis, which, again, to refer to John Lash, he picks up the bull on this, saying quite rightly that Gnosis is kind of a term that we've relayed to these early Christians, but the whole process of worship and the way of life of these people came from the earlier indigenous shamans.
Yes.
And that this would be the truest form of Gnosis, would be the indigenous elders. And so that's why this term is kind of connected with them. And the later forms of this, you could go into, the Carolinians and the Cathars and other groups. And this, you could quite rightly say, would be Christian Gnosticism. But all of the groups which are pre-Christian,
yes,
you can't really make that parallel.
Yes.
But the importance of Seth is noted by all of these Gnostic sects. And here's, again, just one example of one story, which is in the non-canonical Book of Adam, known as. And it recounts that Adam, on his deathbed, realizes he's going to die and has this vision, that the earth is going to be destroyed twice, once by fire and once by water. And so he tells Seth to go back to paradise, to go back to the Garden of Eden. And Seth toddles back over to Eden, goes up to the gates of the Garden of Paradise, and the angel, or the archangel Michael, is there with his flaming sword. And Seth tells him why he's there, that he's been sent by his father. And Adam had sent him to the garden to retrieve 3 seeds from the tree of life, from the center of the garden. And so Seth goes, he's allowed to pass by Michael, by the archangel Michael, and he goes into paradise and he takes 3 seeds from the tree of life, and he returns back to Adam. And this time Adam's already died, but he instructed Seth that if he did die, that he should place the seeds in his mouth and then bury him. So, again, in the Gnostic account that we have, or the various Gnostic accounts, because they all pretty much corroborate this, that Seth buries his father Adam, and from these 3 seeds sprout 3 trees and a huge lake, kind of a spring or a fountain in front of them. And then this was carried on into medieval legend by some of the sort of the alchemical or Dark Ages scholars, where they said that these were the 3 trees which were cut down and actually used as the crosses on Golgotha.
Okay.
Crucify Jesus and the 2 others. So again, it just shows that there's a huge amount of mythology and other ideas and stories surrounding all of these figures from the early Bible.
Yes.
And if we just take the New King James Version, you have nothing. You don't find out anything. They mention, another point worth mentioning is that they only mention the names of the sons, for quite a while. Then they start giving the names of the daughters, but obvious placing of importance upon the male line rather than the female line shows a bias,
That is interesting because the King James version seems to be a version that many, more kind of, kind of hardcore researchers and scholars are looking towards as the true source. I mean, that's the, what do they call it? The authorized version, right, of King James?
Yeah, the authorized.
Right.